we do have Janine Pirro with Laura Ingraham, and Janine's got a very different view of what the cross-examination was. So I'm just going to show you the comparison here. So we're going to jump into the other side here, the conservatives.
Joining me now is Judge Janine Pirro, co-host of The Five. Judge, thank you so much for joining us. I know you were in that overflow room today. The rest of the cross of Stormy Daniels and then the redirect of her, what stood out?
What stood out to me was that she was a very prepared witness for direct examination, I think over-prepared. And when they got to cross-examination, she was a different person. She kept denying things that were, that there was evidence that she was lying. So she would say things like, no, I didn't do it for the money. I just wanted to get my story out. But then she's cross-examined and they said to her, you could have had a press conference Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday night. You could have talked, you were negotiating with Slate, but you made a decision not to go with Slate because they weren't giving you money. So you ended up going with the NDA, getting $130,000. And then what you did was you talked to Anderson Cooper.
So I'm going to clarify that real quick. She's screwing up the timeline. When she took the payment, yeah, she didn't want the story to get out. She wanted to hide it. And then she testified to that too, where they asked her about, you wanted to admit, or wanted to get the story out about having sex or admit you had sex with Donald Trump. And she said, no one would want to admit they had sex with Donald Trump. She wanted to bury the story because she wanted to hide it from her husband and from getting out. So she took the money instead, hoping to just get it done. And she said she didn't care about the money. Whether she's lying or not, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. Maybe she is greedy and selfish and she just wanted it for the money. And she was just trying to blackmail him. That's fine. It still gives it more motive than for him to try and bury it, to try to win the election. So it doesn't excuse his motive. So it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense what Janine's getting at here. She's just trying to, it's the optics look so bad, and she's looking at it from the election standpoint in their audience. But it's not really relevant to the case, whether or not Stormy blackmailed them or not. Or the question is did it happen, and did Trump have a reason to want to hide that? That's it. That's all they were trying to establish.
You talked to In Touch, you talked to Vogue magazine, you did all these interviews, you broke the NDA, and yet she's trying to establish herself as this credible witness who at every turn on cross-examination is actually destroyed. She was decimated. And at the end of the trial, at the end of her testimony, you realize she didn't lay a hand on Donald Trump. She had no personal knowledge, and she said this, she had no personal knowledge of Donald Trump's involvement with the...
And she's right on the last part. She's right. She didn't have any knowledge of Trump's involvement with the payment. She didn't know anything about that. That didn't really affect her. All she knew was Keith Davidson and Michael Cohen, and she didn't know what Trump's involvement and what his knowledge was of it. She just wanted to get it buried. So, interesting point on the two examples there, where you have Lawrence O'Donnell actually reading you what kind of happened to show you an example to make his point about the cross-examination was kind of a joke because they kept bringing back that tweet and the orange turd thing, and you're attacking her and attacking her and attacking her, and it looks bad because you're basically attacking the person that's potentially the victim in this whole situation. And I don't think it played well with the jury, and that was kind of his point. Then you have Judge Janine going, well, no, she lied the whole time, lied, and yet we're not getting any examples of where she lied. And they sit there, well, she obviously never laid a hand on Donald Trump. Well, where did you get that? Because she stayed consistent with the story. She was there. There's photos of her there. There's a photo of her with Donald Trump. So, you see the comparison. One, they're both trying to spin it, right? But one is actually spinning it in a way that it has a lot of evidence to back his spin, and the other is just spewing shit. So I just wanted to give that kind of example. But Fox News got more desperate, and I want to go into this just because it was just horrific. I normally would have skipped all this, but then it got into, they got so desperate with this and how bad the optics looked, and their guy that they're always praising and saying wonderful things about, and they've got to play to their audience, that it went straight from she's Judge Janine she lied, but it was pretty clear that she held her ground pretty well and played off real well to the jury. There were different points in her testimony where the jury and the judge were laughing, which is not a good sign for the defendant, Donald Trump. So Fox News took on a new strategy, which is an old strategy, which is slut shaming. So we'll jump into a couple clips on that because it got bad.
Number one, the judge sounds like a perv because he wants her to talk in lurid detail, and he's asking her to speak more slowly. That's gross. Number two, let's say the transaction did take.
Okay, real quick. The judge asked her to speak slower because she was rambling, and he couldn't understand what she was saying. The other thing is the judge objected a couple times. The judge actually objected to some of the details of the sex act coming out because he thought they'd be prejudicial to the defendant. Right? And then later, Trump's lawyers asked for a mistrial because Stormy Daniels gave out too many salacious details that might make the jury prejudicial. And the judge said, you didn't object. The judge objected a couple times, but they didn't object. So he's like, you can't sit here and say we want a mistrial because all that got out when you didn't even object to it. You never filed a motion in limine to try and prevent her from saying any of this. You just let her do it. So you can't sit there and say, well, mistrial now. I mean, come on. So that's all bullshit right there from Kennedy.
Take place. I'm talking about the physical one. Her being surprised that she was going to a hotel room alone with a man to have body congress is like Pete Sampras being surprised at being invited to a tennis court and you want to see his serve. And then he says, I started shaking when I saw a tennis racket. I didn't know what to do with it. It's like, bro, you've won 17 majors. And, it's this woman saying that she blacked out because she was so nervous. It's like a surgeon saying he barfed at the sight of blood. It's a little hard to believe.
You don't think...
Now, once again, she's a porn star. She should have saw this coming. At the time, she was like 25 or 26. So, she meets Trump at this golf tournament thing. She was at, I think the porn company she was with was sponsoring something there, like one of the holes of the golf tournament. Anyway, Trump invites her to dinner. She initially doesn't want to go, but then decides, her friend talks to her, oh, you should do it because it'll be a good story. She goes to meet him at his hotel room, goes in, his bodyguard's there, so she thinks it's fairly safe, but she goes in, and then, he pretty much accosts her there about the whole situation. No, she said, they said, okay, well, but she's a porn star. She has sex for money, so, yeah, but she has sex for money on camera with other people in the room. There's a contract. There's a consent form. She's already approved the guy that she's going to have sex with. She's not being accosted in a hotel room by a stranger who's over twice her age and who's kind of threatening her career by saying, well, if you don't do this, if you don't have sex with me, I'm not going to help out your career or do anything. And even then, he never did help out her career. But that's my point, is the comparison of a surgeon barfing at blood. It's like, well, what if I kidnapped the surgeon and forced him to do surgery in a hotel room on somebody he really didn't want to do surgery on, or surgery he really didn't want to perform, and I was telling him if he doesn't, that it's going to ruin his career. I can see where he might be a little nervous and black out or throw up or something, because it's duress is when it's happening under. So, different example, but once again, it's her fault for going to the hotel room. She should have known that he was going to try and sexually assault her. She should have known that. It's the whole thing they used to do in the 90s when I was a kid about, oh yeah, the rape victim, well, what were you wearing? When you dress like that, you're kind of asking for it. No, you should be able to dress however you want and not have to worry about getting raped. It's one of those things where it's like, if I walk down the street and I get mugged, and the cops, well, why were you wearing that watch? Why were you wearing that suit? You shouldn't have looked that good. Otherwise, they wouldn't have mugged you. You should have looked like shit. I was like, I should be able to dress how I want to dress. But that's the same thing they're doing. If you're a porn star, you should just expect that you're just going to get sexually assaulted all the time. You're asking for it. It's kind of that argument. And it doubles down, and it gets worse, because then we get just a total scumbag. We'll get in here in a second. Greg Gutfeld.
Look at these humans.
Oh, Greg,
Just
we got an ad. But Greg Gutfeld, he's got his own little stupid comedy show kind of thing on Fox News, which I don't know why. I don't know that he's funny. I don't think he is, but maybe people do. But he's got his little show, and it gets bad because he jumps in on this, and it just gets really bad. So we're gonna watch Greg Gutfeld. I think he's on the 5 talking about this right now.
I love that this event with Stormy happened almost 2 decades ago, yet we're having this trial just months before the election. But no, we're not out to get Trump. It just so happens it falls during this time. And no, the number of charges is irrelevant if they're all the same charges. 80 times 0 is still 0. By the way, I always thought the missionary position is when you pray for sex. All right. Here's some things. I'm going to get into the salacious details. I apologize in advance. I love how Joe Scarborough says he was worrying about what Melania hears. Yeah, right. Save it, you phony. Stormy claims that she blacked out in this tryst with Trump, but she wasn't on any drugs or alcohol. You blacked out without drugs or alcohol. Some of us call that sleeping. Now, it could be that you really blacked out after having sex with Trump, which is a compliment. Truly, he screwed the brains out of her.
Oh, God.
That makes him a sex god. I love that the big criticism.
So now we went even further, right? So we went from she's lying, she's full of shit, there was no evidence to support that, right? Just flat out lies. Then you went to Kennedy going, no, slut shaming. It was her fault for going there in the first place. She should have known that he was going to try and sexually assault her. Then you got Greg Gutfeld going, well, she blacked out, so it must be because he's awesome at sex. So yeah, it just proves that as long as you're good at sex when you rape the girl, it's all a-okay. It's just amazing to me. But yeah, that's how they spun it. Instead of actually getting to the actual reality of what Michael Popak was started with, which is it's not terribly relevant to sex. The only way it's relevant is to show that there's absolute motive for Trump to commit the crime. Right? It gives him motive. That's all she's there to establish. She's not even the most important part of this case. It's the most interesting, sure, but it's not what we're here for, and it's not really the point. But they avoided that at all costs, but then they couldn't directly, go with her testimony, so they had to find some way to make it about it's her fault or something wrong with her. It's just blame the victim shit. So that was basically that. I just wanted to cover that because I just thought that was a fascinating dichotomy between how 2 different things happen. But speaking of